Well, now we have live joining us through Skype Natalia Antelava, who is a co-founder of Coda Story project. Natalia, good evening.
Good evening, Maxim.
Well, we've been talking about that so many stories that fall through cracks of breaking news coverage and obsession with news cycle, and stories like rising LGBT violence in Eastern Europe are among them. They're mostly untold, and people don't know that actually Armenia, Georgia, or Ukraine have as much serious problems with violence against queer people as, for example, in Russia. So why you're not an LGBTI project, you're a basic news project. Why did you choose to lead your first stories specifically devoting coverage to this topic?
Look, what we were trying to do, first of all, with creating Coda Story, is to get away from the culture of exactly that, standing in front of the camera, and which I have done throughout my career. Stand in front of the camera, say what I just read on Twitter and what it was just told to me in the year, and say again, repeat it, because I have just said it half an hour earlier during the previous bulletin, and pass it on as the breaking news. Breaking news, news doesn't happen as often as we want it to happen. So with creating Coda, we wanted to get away from that culture and to dive more deeply into issues that are very important, that don't get enough attention, and that certainly deserve a little bit more of our attention span and a slightly different editorial treatment. So when we were first starting, we had no shortage of crisis to pick from, and we are focusing specifically on crisis reporting, on big issue reporting. And we thought long and hard, and I personally really wanted to do Ukraine, and as a startup, we needed to come up with a realistic subject where that didn't involve sending people into war zones, but at the same time was important enough to tell a much bigger story. And as we thought long and hard, and I have covered LGBTI issues in the former Soviet Union and in the Middle East a lot, and we decided that it was a perfect subject because it certainly is a crisis. It's a crisis that goes far beyond Russia, and it's a crisis that goes far beyond the LGBTI community, and that's how this story is often not told. It's often there are plenty of stories about gay community in the former Soviet Union in Western media, but it often doesn't reflect enough what it means for the rest of these societies. And I do think that gay rights is today in all of the former Soviet countries, really is the frontline battle for progress in the human rights.
But what do you think that, we're looking at the region that is developing quite rapidly with different speed, and countries right now, despite that they share post-Soviet history, they're quite different right now. And we're looking at quite rapid developments in Ukraine and Georgia with reforms. But it seems like the only one narrative that all those countries share is just lack of understanding of civil rights equality, and specifically when it comes to, one of the illustrations, LGBTI rights. Why do we think that it's common problem for all of them, despite they're developing so much differently?
Look, I think there is a complex explanation to it. I think there is a lot more to it, and I also think that the way that the LGBTI problems are different vary from country to country, and the level of tolerance certainly varies as well. But I think, and the reason why I particularly became interested in the issue, besides the civil rights and the human plight of people who are on the victim side in this battle, is the fact that it really it is in a sense you saw very clearly about 3 or 4 years ago a very clear shift against gay rights. It was never fully accepted. It was always a taboo. It was always very, very difficult. But one of the most interesting things about doing the Coda project on LGBTI rights was talking to people who spent a lot of time in Russia, in Moscow, in the early 1990s, where there was a real promise of freedom, and there was in many areas, but including for gay couples and gay life in general, and to see how that space was closed down over time, and especially shut down in the last 3 or 4 years. That is exactly what we wanted to explore. And we in Coda, we divide our coverage in trends, in trends that are kind of running through the crisis that we cover. And one of the trends in the LGBTI crisis is the Kremlin influence, and you can see how the Kremlin propaganda law, the anti-gay propaganda law, it's kind of silly term, but that's what it's called. You can see how it echoed throughout the former Soviet Union, from the sudden spike in violence against gays in places like Georgia, to similar legislation being discussed in places like Belarus and Kyrgyzstan,
even Ukraine.
That's right, and even Ukraine, and that is the influence that we really wanted to explore as well. So,
Natalie, unfortunately, we gotta leave it there. But you're definitely right that it's a very interesting case, an illustrative case, even if you don't care about civil rights equality, how geopolitics interferes with all those complex issues. Again, thank you so much for joining us tonight. That was Natalie Antelava, co-founder of Coda Story. We will be right back.